When we became a state, the federal government let us select 100 million acres of land, and Alaskans selected potential oil lands on the North Slope. Under the federal law, resources under the state land belong to the state. The state leases the land to oil companies. The Alaska legislature, a number of years ago, enacted a law that gave a lot of credits to the oil companies. Oil company employees who are members of the legislature voted to give the oil companies the benefits at the expense of Alaska. We're voting on this because essentially they gave away Alaska's fair share. And what we're after now is that we get back a fair share of the oil production profits. We own the resources.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Robin Brenna, RSD Properties, and David Carter.
Believe it or not, Alaskans are getting a worse deal for our oil now than back when all those politicians were taking bribes. In the past few years, an Alaskan family of 4 has lost $28,000 in dividends as ConocoPhillips raised its dividend 3 times and paid their CEO over $80,000 per day. Does that sound fair to you? Didn't think so. Save your dividends. Vote yes for Alaska's Fair Share.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Robin Brenna, RSD Properties, and David Carter.
Hello, my name is Jane Anvik. I'm one of the sponsors of the Alaska Fair Share Act. It's an initiative. An initiative is a law that is made by the people. We went out and collected 39,000 signatures of Alaskans from every corner of the state, and then we were certified. We will be on the ballot this November. Now, I would like to introduce Robin Brenna. He is also a sponsor of the Alaska Fair Share Act. Robin was raised in Skagway, and when he needed to raise money for going to college, he worked on the White Pass Railroad. He went to college, and he successfully completed his law degree, as well as a master's in business administration and accounting and finance. As soon as he was finished, he came right back to Alaska, and he's been here ever since. Robin is a successful oil and gas attorney. He initiated his firm, Brenna, Bell & Walker, and they started working on oil and gas industries, on making sure representing their interests, which were to get a fair tax and also transportation access. He's also represented municipalities and has secured fair taxes for them as well. Robin's interest in this act is that he believes that Alaskans are not getting a fair share for the sale of our oil. His support for the Fair Share Act is not financially beneficial to Robin. In fact, it cost him a lot of money.
Big Oil is spending millions to stop Alaskans from getting a fair share for our oil. So what's their plan to solve the budget deficit? Eliminate PFDs, cut even more jobs, gut our schools, impose new taxes on Alaskans? Truth is, to add up to ballot measure 1, we'd have to do all those. Doesn't it make more sense to vote yes? You bet it does. Vote yes for jobs. Yes for PFDs. Vote yes on 1.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Robin Brenna, RSD Properties, and David Carter.
It's my pleasure to introduce a person who I regard as a man of integrity, an Alaska patriot, and my friend, Robin Brenna.
Thank you for your kind words and introduction, Jane. I'm humbled by it, much as I've been humbled by working with many great Alaskans who have stepped forward to the defense of Alaska and supported the Fair Share Act. I support the Fair Share Act because the Alaska that I love is suffering, and I know the Fair Share Act will help her. Every Alaskan knows the suffering is real. We've spent $18 billion of our savings. The state's support for municipalities and for schools around the state have been cut, forcing increases to our property taxes of all Alaskans. Our university system is being systematically gutted. The Alaska Marine Highway System can no longer reliably provide service to coastal communities with no road access. And the essential services that many Alaskans rely on, police, safety, senior services, have been cut to the bone. Even when the oil prices had recovered a couple years ago when the oil price was $65 to $75 a barrel, and even before the COVID virus hit Alaska, our economy was in shambles. We had lost 5,500 oil and gas jobs. We had lost 15,000 jobs statewide. We had the highest unemployment rate of any state in the United States. Great Alaskans had to take their families and leave Alaska to search for work so they could continue to support their families. Why is Alaska suffering when the price of oil was $65 or $75 a barrel? Why was Alaska suffering before the COVID virus hit Alaska? The answer is simple. We are getting less of a share from the sale of our oil than we ever have in our history, less than any major resource owner in the world for our oil. To be blunt, we're giving away our oil to major international oil producers, and Alaska is being left to suffer. To correct the problem, we need to find a way to keep more of the wealth from Alaska's oil in Alaska, helping Alaskans. Alaskans have historically got a fair share of their oil through royalties and production taxes. With regard to royalties, our current royalties are 12.5%. This is half of what we should be getting. Texas, for example, has been getting 25% in royalties for over 30 years without any impact to investment or production whatsoever. With regard to production taxes, since Senate Bill 21 passed 5 years ago, we have paid the oil producers more in credits than they have paid us in production taxes. The state is having to borrow $1 billion in order to pay credits that we can't even afford to pay with the oil taxes.
We have a choice. Pass ballot measure 1 and get a fair share for our oil, or let them keep ripping us off, lose our PFDs, gut our schools, kill thousands of jobs, and raise taxes on ourselves. Prop 1 will save PFDs, education, and Alaskan jobs. Voting no would drive Alaska off the fiscal cliff. Pretty easy choice. Vote yes on 1 for Alaska's fair share.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Robin Brenna, RSD Properties, and David Carter.
This is a chart of production revenues after credits are paid from 2009 to 2019. The red line in the middle is when Senate Bill 21 went in effect. You can see that before Senate Bill 21, we had collected $19 billion for those 5 years. You can also see that after Senate Bill 21, we have collected zero, less than zero. Let me be clear. 19 billion, zero. You want to know why Alaska is suffering? That's why. To illustrate this point further, this chart is our production revenue per barrel before credits. The reason I did it before credits was because all these would be zero if I didn't. This is how we did when the price of oil was $65 before Senate Bill 21 and after Senate Bill 21. Before Senate Bill 21, we used to get $12 a barrel. After Senate Bill 21, we get $2 or $3 a barrel, a quarter to a sixth as much per barrel as we used to get. These are the reasons why Alaska is suffering, because our petroleum taxes, which has been a foundation for our fair share, have completely collapsed under Senate Bill 21. To put these charts in a broader context, we have gotten less than 12.5% of the gross revenues from our oil in the last 5 years. Texans and North Dakotans have gotten about 30%, or 240% more than we have gotten. We get less, substantially less, than any other resource owner in the world. We get less than the Russians, the Nigerians, the Brazilians, the Norwegians, and every other major resource owner in the world. This is ridiculous.
Alaska's broke, and our government's floating all kinds of ideas, like an income tax, sales tax, killing your dividend, that all involve taking money away from you. Meanwhile, over the past 5 years, Alaska's paid the big oil companies more than they've paid us in production taxes. Why would we give away our oil and then tax ourselves to make up for it? That's just crazy. Vote yes on 1 for Alaska's Fair Share.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Robin Brenna, RST Properties, and David Carter.
The Fair Share Act solves this issue. First, it raises the minimum rate from 0 to 4% to 10%. Secondly, it doesn't allow folks to deduct costs that aren't related to production from the fields. And third, it adds progressivity to the rates. So as the price of oil increases, or as producer profits increase, Alaskans get a little bit more. When passed, the Fair Share Act will result in production taxes that are lower than they were on average for 3 decades before Senate Bill 21 passed. When passed, the Fair Share Act will have no negative effect on investment or jobs in Alaska. And in fact, if we're able to keep $1 billion more of our wealth in Alaska, it will help jobs in Alaska. And finally, and very importantly, the Fair Share Act will require that tax filings related to these 3 major fields will be public. Alaskans do not know today how much money Exxon, BP, or ConocoPhillips are making out of Prudhoe Bay, the crown jewel of Alaska's wealth. Alaskans need to know the revenues and costs and profits from our major fields. We are the stewards for hundreds of billions of dollars of oil wealth, and that stewardship demands transparency.
Today's word is irony. That's when the big oil companies whose lobbyists wrote the massive oil giveaway and whose employees in the legislature voted to pass it tell us that a ballot measure created with 40,000 signatures to be voted on by over 300,000 Alaskans is a shady backroom deal. It's almost funny, in a tragic kind of way. Stop the giveaway and save Alaska. Vote yes on 1 for Alaska's Fair Share.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Robin Brenna, RST Properties, and David Carter.
Each of these fundamental policies, raising $1 billion, having deductions be related to the field, and transparency, are fundamentally sound, clearly articulated, and good for Alaska. Is the Fair Share Act the best solution? To be frank, it's the only solution that will bring in revenue anytime soon to Alaska. All the other suggestions are worse. Cutting your dividend or eliminating your dividend, imposing an income tax. All of the other suggestions involve taxing ourselves rather than just simply getting a fair price for our oil. What sense does it make to you to take less for our oil and to tax ourselves? Would you sell me your car for less than it's worth and then tax yourself for the revenue that you lost? Of course you wouldn't. Governor Hammond was incredibly clear when he said if there ever comes a time when we need revenue, the first place that we should go is to be sure that Alaskans are getting their fair share for their oil. We should go there before we even consider any other form of general taxation on Alaskans. I agree with Governor Hammond. Is it the right time for the Fair Share Act? There is no better time than now to correct what's wrong and to make it right. Alaskans will be worse off for taking less for our oil than it's worth every moment that we take less. Why should Alaskans continue to take less for our oil so that major international oil companies can make more from Alaska than they do anywhere else in the world? 5 years ago, we were asked to give up our fair share. We were asked to give up our fair share under the promises that there would be more investment in Alaska if we did, that there would be more jobs for Alaskans if we did, that there would be more production if we did, and that there would ultimately be more state revenue if we did. Not a single promise was kept. All of them were broken. We gave their Senate Bill 21 a chance, and it has failed Alaska. It's time to give the Fair Share Act its chance to try to save Alaska. Because Alaskans have managed to maintain their fair share in the past, we have a modern Alaska. Because of that, we have a permanent fund. Because of that, we have permanent fund dividends. Because of that, we have schools and universities and facilities and infrastructure that Alaska needs for its future. Please help us keep Alaska's fair share. Please help us get back Alaska's fair share. It is fair for Alaskans. It is fair for the producers. Please vote yes for Alaska's fair share. Thank you.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Brenna, RSD Properties, and David Carter.
I've been here for 50 years. I've watched the legislature create laws, shift policies back and forth over that time. We are giving away the farm. Alaska has lost its way. And in an effort to serve the interests of big oil, we have shortchanged ourselves. And it was by our own hand. The Alaska State Legislature created a law that takes away the resources of Alaska. We have opportunity to create the future of Alaska by simply changing the law. We can keep that money in Alaska and make a huge difference in what happens to our state. The initiative gives the power to us, to the people, to create the law that the legislature has refused to do. We have an obligation for future generations. What we have to do is be good stewards of that non-renewable resource. We just happened to be here when the oil was being produced. We have the opportunity right before us at this moment, and this initiative creates the power of the people to be able to say, keep the resources in Alaska for future generations.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Brenna, RSD Properties, and David Carter. A few years ago, the oil companies told us that if Alaskans would take less for our oil, we'd see better times ahead. So we gave it a chance. And every year since then, our dividend has shrunk, Alaskans have lost jobs, and vital services like roads, police, and schools have been cut to the bone. Turns out giving away billions of dollars to big oil was bad for Alaska. It's time to save our state and stop the giveaway. Vote yes for Alaska's Fair Share.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Brenna, RSD Properties, and David Carter.
I'm Vic Fisher. I got to write Alaska's Constitution, which states resources shall be developed for the maximum benefit of the people. But we're paying producers to take our oil. We've got to change the law. Prop 1 will restore Alaska's fair share for our oil. As the founding father of Alaska, I'm voting yes for Alaska's Fair Share.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Brenna, RSD Properties, and David Carter.
Hello and welcome to the first of two debates that we're producing on the ballot measures that are up for consideration on November's election. My name's Steve Johnson. I'm the director of the Seawolf Debate Program here at the University of Alaska Anchorage, and I'm very pleased to be partnering tonight with the Anchorage Daily News and the UAA Votes Project to bring you these debates. The Seawolf Debate Program does a lot of work in this area. In addition to our competitive team, we have a pretty robust public service agenda where we host opportunities for young people to get involved with competitive debating. We produce public debates on issues like this for Alaskans and do our best to cultivate good quality civil discourse for our state and for the residents of our state. The motion for our debate is Alaskans will benefit from passing the Alaska North Slope Production Tax Increase, also known as the Fair Share Act, ballot initiative. Alaskans are unique among the residents of the other 49 states in many ways, but perhaps most significantly in this way. They likely know more about the taxation of natural resources than do most of their fellow Americans. Let's take a second now to meet our debaters. Senator Wielechowski has been active on veterans issues, management of the permanent fund dividend, and, appropriate for this debate, policy surrounding revenues generated from Alaska's natural resources.
In 2013, the Alaska State Legislature passed Senate Bill 21, which dramatically cut Alaska's share of our oil wealth. This bill was perhaps the most massive transfer of resource wealth in state history, transferring billions of dollars from Alaskans to the oil industry. We now receive the lowest share for our oil in state history. In exchange, Alaskans were made a series of promises. Alaskans were promised 1 million barrels of oil per day. In fact, they named SB 21 the More Alaska Production Act. The oil industry promised Alaskans more jobs, more investment, more revenue to the state, and a growing permanent fund. The oil industry spent tens of millions of dollars on TV ads, radio ads, mailers, Facebook ads, convincing Alaskans that we'd be better off taking billions less for our oil. Supporters of this transfer of our oil wealth said, give it a chance. And Alaskans are trusting people. We gave them that chance. So here we are 7 years later. Did they honor their promises? Instead of 1 million barrels per day, oil has dropped below 500,000 barrels per day for the first time in state history, even before the pandemic. And there is no rebound in sight. Did they keep their promises on jobs? Just 4 weeks after the citizens' referendum, BP slashed 475 oil jobs at a time when oil prices were near $100 per barrel. The oil industry has since cut another 5,000 jobs while increasing the percentage of non-residents working on the slope. Did they keep their promises on investment? At Prudhoe Bay, investment dropped from $826 million to $202 million. Slope-wide over the last 4 years, capital investment is the lowest in a decade. Did they keep their promises on more revenue to the state? In the last 5 years after factoring in tax credits, the industry has had a negative production tax rate. And did they keep their promises on the permanent fund? We all know the answer to that. The PFD was cut just 2 years after Senate Bill 21 crippled 80% of our state revenue. Under SB 21, the oil industry has taken about $1 billion per year in deductible oil tax credits. That's equivalent to every man, woman, and child giving up roughly $1,500 of their PFD every single year to the oil industry. That's $6,000 in lost PFDs for the average family of four every single year to the oil industry. And what have we gotten for that? Thousands of fewer jobs, billions less in investment, billions in lost revenue. So where did that money go? Did the oil companies reinvest it in Alaska? Since SB 21, 68% of ConocoPhillips' worldwide profit was made in Alaska, yet they've only reinvested 15% of their capital in Alaska. Instead, Alaska's oil wealth is being used to fund jobs and investment in Texas, North Dakota, Malaysia, Libya, Indonesia, and China. While we have seen our permanent fund dividends cut 2/3, ConocoPhillips increased their dividends to their shareholders by 60% in the last 2 years. While Alaskans have been forced to use billions in savings in the last few years to make up for our oil revenue losses, ConocoPhillips paid off $12 billion of their debt. And while we have seen draconian cuts to our marine highway system, education, pre-K, public safety, snow plowing, the university system, and more, ConocoPhillips increased their stock buyback program authorization from $10 billion to $25 billion. By any metric, this oil wealth giveaway has been a catastrophic policy failure. It's not like we didn't see this coming. When we were debating this oil wealth transfer in 2013, we asked for commitments in the legislature, in statute, to require more jobs, more Alaska hire, more investment, more production, and more state revenue. The oil industry opposed every single one of those requests, and the legislature compliantly listened. There's a long history of the legislature trusting the oil industry to do the right thing, and a long history of the oil industry choosing their corporate shareholders over Alaskans. In fact, a judge once accused the Alaska government of, quote, inexcusable trustfulness with the oil industry in a case where the oil industry refused to pay billions of dollars in royalties to the state. You can't really blame the oil industry for trying to make as much money as they can. That's their job. But you can blame the legislature for not insisting that we get a fair share for our oil and a fair share for our shareholders, the people of Alaska. And now, here we are again. The legislature has had 7 years to fix this bill. We have a constitutional obligation to get the maximum benefit for our resources, yet the legislature has refused to fix these well-known, easy-to-fix problems. When amendments have been offered on the floor to fix these things in the legislature, oil companies' supporters have said, this should be fixed in a bill that goes before a committee hearing. When bills are then filed, they refuse to give them committee hearings. Under the Alaska Constitution, when the legislature abdicates its responsibility, when it refuses to fix a problem, the people of the state have a constitutional right to fix it themselves. That is what this initiative does. It's a simple bill, this initiative. It only applies to 3 fields: the Prudhoe Bay unit, the Kapark River unit, and the Colville River unit. It does 4 things. It requires transparency of financial data. Right now, as a member of the Senate Finance Committee and a former member, co-chair of the Senate Resources Committee, I can't even find out how much profit an oil company makes in the state of Alaska. I can't find out what their expenses are, what their net present value are. This is information the oil companies routinely provide around the world, but in Alaska, the policymakers are asked to make critical policy decisions while blindfolded. This bill fixes that. This bill cuts deductible oil tax credits. In recent years, we have been allowing about $1 billion per year in tax credits and getting nothing in return. This bill closes a loophole that allows oil companies to deduct costs unrelated to producing oil from their units. Lastly, the current production tax is 4%. This bill raises that to 10% and increases that slightly as prices rise. But even this is still below the 12.5% tax rate that was in effect for decades. And while the oil companies are spending tens of millions of dollars to try once again to convince Alaskans to take far less for our oil, the oil industry will still pay less than what they have paid if this initiative passes for decades. With no production taxes net of credits, Alaska's royalty and tax share is currently about 12.5%. It's a far cry from the 33% share Governor Hammond insisted we get. It's less than half what the oil companies pay in Texas and North Dakota. When this initiative passes, Alaska will get 22.5% of the value of our oil at most oil prices. This is still below our historical average of 27%, still below Texas, still below North Dakota. And remember, this initiative only applies to the 3 most profitable fields in Alaska. It's time we acted like a sovereign and not a colony. It's time we heeded the words of Governor Wally Hickel and act like an owner state that we are. It's time we heeded the words of Governor Jay Hammond and insist we get our fair share. I hope you'll join me in supporting Ballot Measure 1 to ensure we get a fair share for our oil. Thank you.
The Alaska Fair Share Act is an initiative, which is a law created by the citizens. It allows the public interest to make the decisions instead of oil company lobbyists. We will change the law where Alaska paid the oil companies more in credits than they paid us in taxes. We'll stop the giveaway and create Alaska jobs and a sustainable permanent fund dividend. Vote yes for the Proposition 1, Alaska's Fair Share.
Paid for by Vote Yes for Alaska's Fair Share. Top contributors Robin Brenna, RSD Properties, and David Carter.